But then Netanyahu said much more recently, just the other was a week or two ago, said that Israel is going to take over the Gaza Strip, which that sounds much more likely to me. You know, I think this is the weird dynamic kind of here is that I think they're not like so stupid that I'm aware of something that like these guys aren't aware of, right? Like they know that they've lost control of the media. They know they've lost control of the narrative, and they know that they've lost control of the youth in America. And that at some point, you know, those 70-year-olds watching cable news are going to age out and die, and the people in charge are going to be this generation that has a totally different view of Israel than previous generations. They know that, but then the question becomes like, what do you do with that information? And so I think that there is a part of Netanyahu and the Israeli war cabinet and the Israeli government who are looking at this and going, all right, so we got like 10 more years of this relationship. You know, we got like 10 more years of where the U.S. has our back and we can do whatever we want. And so you could see where the conclusion from that might be, we got to go for it now. Like if you really do have this greater Israel project, well, right now, under the Trump administration, this is your moment. He has already vowed he's going to do whatever to support Israel. He is totally on your side. You have this administration. There's every last member of this administration supports Israel. So now's the time. Annex Gaza and the West Bank. And, you know, parts of Syria, too, and whatever else they want to do. So I think they might be going for it, you know? And then I don't know. We'll see. I mean,
when they started bombing Iran, that's what I thought. I was like, oh, boy.
Well, they tried to suck Trump into a regime change war there, you know, and it didn't work. But the whole thing, you know, the whole 12-day war, first of all, this thing is not over. We're kind of at like the fundamentals of the conflict are all still there. And in fact, I think there was just a few days ago, like there were a couple like Israeli spokesmen who were already signaling like, we may have to go, you know, see about this again. Netanyahu himself said when him and Trump met in the White House, and it was a really fascinating moment, which, you know, I'm not trying to make too much of, but it was pretty hilarious in a way, like a little microcosm, where they asked Donald Trump at one point, they go, so is that it with Iran? Like, is the war continuing or is it over? And he goes, well, you know, I don't really want to see it continue, but maybe that's a better question for Bibi. And you're like, what? Wait, what? I'm sorry. You're like, well, my boss is right here, so you might as well ask him, which is not exactly true. You know, I'm not saying that. I know Jeffrey Sachs, who I love, who is a real expert, not like me or Douglas Murray, but a real expert who's, you know, I don't agree with him on everything, but his foreign policy is very good. But he said, and I think he was saying it kind of tongue in cheek, but he said, I regard Netanyahu as the worst U.S. president of my lifetime, which is a very funny line. And I get what he's saying.
Well, how long has he been running Israel?
Well, he was prime minister first in 1996, and then he's had a few stints where he was out. But he's been in and out.
So they have a completely different setup, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can keep coming back.
Yeah. And so he was, but he's the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history at this point. But I will say that there are people, you know, I know people go down, you know, rabbit holes on Twitter and stuff like that. And I do think Jeffrey Sachs I think he was being somewhat tongue in cheek when he said it, but I do think he's overstating his hand. It's not that Israel runs America. If Netanyahu ran America, I can promise you we would have had a regime change war in Iran. We would not have stopped where Donald Trump stopped if Netanyahu was actually in control of the U.S. military instead of just having significant influence over it. So like, I do think I've just read enough about Netanyahu, the Likudniks, the neocons. This is the regime change war that they've wanted. This is their seventh. This is 7 out of 7 to get Iran. So this is what they want. Right. And if you actually even look at the war itself, it was like when Trump, it was before and after Trump dropped the bunker busters on their nuclear sites, Israel just started bombing regime targets. They weren't just bombing their nuclear sites. They were trying to overthrow the regime. And in fact, they like made calls to these Iranian generals and threatened their families and basically said, we're going to kill your families unless you guys flee right now. It just didn't work. They weren't going to do that. And then once that didn't work, they were kind of like, and then Iran gave Trump an out. they responded with this nonsense, the same thing they did after after Trump killed Soleimani, where they fire these rockets, they give us advance warning, they make sure we move everyone out of the way, so because they know they don't want to kill an American there, because then it's full-scale war. But like, if they hadn't, it's so funny because like, we put all of this in the mullahs' hands, and if they had just decided, which every military analyst concludes they can touch Americans in the region, they didn't. Had they, this would have been and I think that was the goal. I think that was Netanyahu's goal of it, was to provoke that response that would have led to a regime change war, and it didn't work. And Trump, to his credit, his instinct is to de-escalate these things when he can, but also to Trump's fault, never should have gotten in the thing to begin with. It was the whole Iranian nuclear threat is as much bullshit as the Iraqi nuclear threat. I mean, yeah, it is true that they have a civilian nuclear program that Iraq didn't have. And it is, I saw when Mike Baker was on, who I love Mike Baker, but I think he's wrong about all this stuff. But when you had said to him at one point where you were like, yeah, but like, the counter argument to that is that this is like a latent nuclear deterrent, is the idea, not that they're developing a nuclear weapon. And Mike was basically like, yeah, but they're up to 60%, and that's on its way to 90%. But the thing is, why weren't they at 90%? They didn't have to stop at 60%. They mastered the fuel cycle and they figured out all this technology a long time ago. They could have enriched up to weapons grade. Why did they stop at 60%? And why did they then enter negotiations with the United States of America about the level to which they were enriching uranium? Because it's a latent nuclear deterrent. It's a bargaining chip. They were down at like 3 to 5% or something under the JCPOA until Trump tore it up, until Trump backed out of it. And then under the rules of the JCPOA, because they're still in it with Europe, and we'll see where that goes now, but they were allowed to up the enrichment once America pulled out. And so they exercised that option in the agreement. And the idea that they were there was the annual threat assessment had come out just a few months before the war, and Tulsi Gabbard signed her name at the bottom of it and then testified before Congress, and it's clear as day. She turned around and acted like people were misrepresenting it, but they weren't. It was clear as day. Anyone can read it for themselves. She said Iran has not made the political decision to pursue a nuclear weapon yet, let alone have achieved it or gotten one. And when Donald Trump was asked about that, remember they said, your own director of national intelligence says that they're not developing a weapon. And he goes, well, I disagree.
Have you ever seen I'm sure you have, the compilation of Netanyahu over the years saying how close Iran is to getting a nuclear weapon?
Yeah, it's great.